Good morning. Well, I'm ready to read you the last installment. This is more memories still from my childhood in New York City in the 1950s. And please keep in mind, these are the perceptions of a child, or memories of my perceptions as a child, without a whole lot of adult interpretation. So, I said my father never went out. That wasn't strictly true. Usually about once a week he'd go down to Emma's Luncheonette on the corner of 165th Street and Walton Avenue and get for himself, my mother, and me cherry vanilla ice cream cones. And then, one night a year, Murray Polks would come up from Brooklyn, and they would be gone together till 4 in the morning at the Masonic Lodge. What they did, I had no idea, and no one ever spoke about it in my presence. I always figured it was either too unmentionable or too boring. But at that age, I also had no idea what unmentionable might entail. The Masons in New York City had their own Jewish group. Normally, Jews are excluded from Masonic lodges. But since a large percent of the city's population of 8 million was Jewish, they worked around that by just making their own lodge system. So much in New York City was Jewish. There were kosher delicatessens back then, even more than you see McDonald's and pizza places today. All the bakeries I ever went into had Jewish-style pastries. Of course, I already told you about the kosher butchers. And there were synagogues here and there, like there are churches in most other towns. It seemed like most Jewish kids had either parents or grandparents that were immigrants, usually from Eastern Europe and Russia. My parents were born in the USA, my mom in Brooklyn, and my dad in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. He used to tell me how he rode in horse and buggies when he was a boy. When he was dating my mom around the start of World War II, she made him donate his high, old-fashioned Pierce Arrow automobile to the war effort. They recycled the metal to be used in things for the armed forces. I will have to look it up one day, but I have always pictured a Pierce Arrow like the kind of cars the Keystone Cops rode around in. When I was very young, we got a Cadillac Fleetwood. That was back when cars were plump and curvy, like Rubens would have drawn if he had done cars instead of women. No seat belts were required. Then we graduated to a brand new Oldsmobile Dynamic 88. It was metallic gold and long and sleek and modern. My dad put seat belts in front because he had read they were a good thing for safety. I guess maybe working at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, he got very safety conscious. He took me out there a couple of times, and all over there were safety posters. He was a quarterman in the Navy and a firearms and gunnery expert, or something that sounds like that. I don't know what those people do, but I do know two things he did. He didn't mind heights, so when the Navy needed something put up on top of a mast of a big ship, he would volunteer to climb up there and do it. Apparently, it wasn't a popular job, and it was on a volunteer basis. There were plenty of men afraid of heights, and not many willing to make the climb. Also, one time he was doing his electrician work inside a ship. He was bending over, so his shirt gapped away from his pants. He felt something run up on his back between his shirt and his body. He knew it must be a ship rat. He was alone and had nothing else to do but to reach around and quickly grab it with his large hands and squeeze so it couldn't move. Then he pulled rat and shirt off of him and kept squeezing till he could get rid of it. He was very strong. Of course, in a predicament like that, I imagine most practical-minded people would find the necessary strength. The one thing my father wouldn't do is work in submarines. He apparently was claustrophobic. I never knew what the word meant and don't know of it as such, that it was actually used to describe his dislike of the confined spaces of submarines. But I inherited it. One time, my husband and I visited Charleston, South Carolina. I was 8.5 months pregnant and big as a house at the time. Honestly, anyone who saw me was afraid I was about to deliver any minute in their restaurant, shop, elevator, hotel lobby, or supermarket checkout line. We toured the Patriots Point Naval Area. We went up and down and all around an aircraft carrier and a merchant marine vessel. But when I saw that tiny hole you had to fit through to enter the submarine, I said, no chance. I honestly felt that if I did fit through the entrance, I would be sure to get stuck somewhere along the way inside and would go into hysterics. So we passed on that tour. I think my husband was disappointed. I mean, disappointed he didn't get to go into the submarine. I didn't think my mother was claustrophobic, but one time we were visiting her in Florida. Louis and Olive and my husband and I and 4-month-old Adam went to an Italian restaurant with my mom. They seated us in the basement area, which was very nice, at a round table. My mom got put in one of those Hawaiian Queen Lily Ukulani chairs with her back up by a mirrored wall. I was next to her and my husband was next to me. So she was sort of wedged in a chair with arms and difficult to get out of. All of a sudden, she just had to get out of that chair. I don't remember where we put her, but we did eat sitting next to each other. I remember that because at one point I was trying to nurse Adam. The blanket I had draped over my shoulder and over him started to slip off. Well, did my mother grab it and help me? No, sir. She sat there helplessly laughing. I was holding Adam and trying not to reveal my bust to the entire restaurant. Also, he had spit a bunch of milk out, and I had to get him reattached, you might say. I was asking for someone to help me. My mom is laughing, and Louis is saying to her, "You're the grandmother," as if she should be expected to help. Louis and Olive are laughing. I was laughing away, too. Well, my husband got the blanket and held it up in front of me to screen me from everyone else. We did finally get everything under control. But that is why I remember about my mother getting an attack of claustrophobia. When I was little, I had an aversion to peanuts. I loved salted cashews and I loved the red pistachio nuts that you could buy in a tiny box for a nickel. You'd hold them between your teeth to get the crack wedged open and then finish spreading the shells with your thumbnails. You knew who had bought pistachios that day because their thumb would be red from the dye on the shells. But peanuts, salted peanuts, I hated. It didn't start out that way. I mean, I wasn't born hating peanuts. I used to love them too. But one night, I consumed almost an entire can of greasy, salted peanuts. The blue can, with Mr. Peanut smiling in his top hat and leaning on his walking stick. Apparently, I did not do too good a job of chewing before I swallowed. I know this because later that night, I got sick to my stomach and began throwing up. My bedroom was a good 25 or 30 feet from the bathroom in our apartment, and I threw up the entire length of that hallway between the two rooms. That's how I knew the nuts hadn't been properly chewed. I vaguely remember my mother telling me it served me right, or some other not very sympathetic comment after it was all over. The whole incident made a big impression on me. I spent the rest of my childhood convinced that if I ate so much as one peanut, I would throw up enough to cover a 30-foot hallway. So it was years and years before another peanut passed between my lips. I always took a bath during my childhood years. Rather than a shower. Our shower was quite different from the nozzle-type things you see today. It came out of the wall about midway down the length of the tub and at least 6 feet above the floor. And it was shaped like a sunflower that drooped down. The water sprinkled out of a round plate from holes dotted all over it, just like the seeds would be on a sunflower head. Now, I don't mean to give any impressions that I was any cleaner than any other child. I washed my hands in cold water only, as it took too long to wait for warm. Also, you had to turn both a hot and a cold faucet on for warm water, then adjust the temperature. I had no time. Cold water did fine for me. I passed each hand over the bar of soap once and produced absolutely no lather when my hands were under the water. Then I dried them. I never did look at the towel afterwards, but I expect that either the dirt remained on my hands or else the towel was black. One summer, while I was away at camp for 2 months, I remember I didn't shower but 2 times the whole summer. It was quite reasonable for me. I swam in a lake once or twice a day, and I truly believed the important thing in being clean was contact with water. So why would I need to shower after all that time in the lake? I didn't shower at home, just took baths. Soaking in the lake seemed about the same to me. And there was no tub in our cabin anyway. I figured showers were optional, except the 2 times during the summer when we were told we had to take them. That particular summer, my parents were not available to pick me up when camp ended. So my Uncle Leo and Aunt Gertie came to get me, and my cousin Carol, from Camp Marity in Pittstown, New Jersey in the Poconos. I was to stay a few nights with them in New Rochelle before I went back home to the Bronx. My Aunt Gertie, when we arrived at her house, took my arm and stretched it out. She looked at it and said, "What's that?" referring to my tan. I told her it was my tan. I was familiar with it. It had darkened over the summer. It was the color of a tan. But when it got to the inside of my elbow, instead of making an angle out towards the back of my arm, it made a sharp angle into the crook of my elbow. Aunt Gertie looked incensed. She took me to the sink and began to scrub my arms as hard as she could. Well, do you know that tan on the inside of my elbow just scrubbed right off? Of course, the hairy part of my arm remained tan, but the smooth part inside was fairly white. I was amazed. It didn't occur to me till some time later that the tan she had scrubbed off was actually 2 months of dirt accumulated from my lake swims, hard play, and sweat, all baked on by the summer sun. Anyway, as I said, I took baths as a child. As I remember, it was once a week, but it could have been once a day. That's just not how I happen to remember it. But our tub was also used for other things than baths. When I had a pet hamster and it was time to clean its cage, I would put it in the tub, where it could run but not get lost. I hated it. It used to run up my arm with its prickly little nails. Also, it would run on that metal treadmill all night, and the metal squeaked something awful. Finally, my parents ran a stick down through the cage so the treadmill couldn't turn at night. The other important use for the bathtub was as a home for the baby alligator my father brought me back from his trip to Florida. That was the same trip during which my mom became a blonde. I bought a plastic baby bathtub to keep it in and put the baby bathtub in the big tub. I loved that alligator. Its left eye was damaged, and I felt so sorry for it. One day, my mother went into the bathroom and didn't see the alligator in its tub. She panicked and ran out of the house. Finding one of the men in the neighborhood, she convinced him to come upstairs and look for the alligator. From what I understand, they both peered around the bathroom door, saw nothing in the tub, and fled out of the apartment. On my way home, I must have met my mother outside and was alarmed that something must have happened to my poor alligator. I raced upstairs and found it hiding under the baby bathtub. It could never have gotten out of the big tub anyway. It was only about 1.5 feet long at most. Soon after that, my alligator made a bus trip in a shoebox to what was going to be its new home, the Bronx Zoo. My mother was afraid of all animals. We did have a parakeet named Pinky for short. And I tried turtles, goldfish, tropical fish, and an anole at various times. But cats and dogs were out. My mother said when she was little, someone put a kitten on her head and it got all tangled in her hair. Ever since, she'd been afraid of cats. I don't know what her excuse was for dogs, but we never could have a dog either. Once a girlfriend of Lewis's, it might have even been Olive, sent me a giant roach from someplace like Madagascar. It hissed when you touched it. I kept that for a while, but somehow a giant cockroach is not really a fitting pet for a New Yorker, even if it is from a foreign country. So, those are my memories, and tomorrow I will read you something humorous, I think. I have a series of stories about a dog that we once had, a schnauzer, although my youngest, Claire, used to call it a schnauzer. So these will be stories I'll start tomorrow about Otto the schnauzer. I hope you enjoyed this. Maybe some of you could relate to it. Maybe some of you never knew some of these things, if you were raised maybe in the country instead of in the city or in a big city. Anyhow, I hope that you liked it. If you didn't, that's fine too. You didn't have to listen, right? Okay. Well, I hope you have a really good day. Hope that I've helped you pass some time of day in case you're still stuck at home. Stay safe.